Okay, I want you to picture a receipt for a second. But, this isn't for your morning coffee or a new phone. This receipt is for $62 billion. And what you bought isn't just one thing. It's this massive, sprawling network of pipes, cables, railways, power plants, even ports that literally carve a path through an entire country.
It's a receipt that, it fundamentally reshapes the map of Asia. We are talking about arguably the largest, most complex infrastructure project of the 21st century.
Today, we're unpacking the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, or CPEC. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the stakes here are just incredibly high. Usually when you hear about this, you get one of two headlines. It's either an unbreakable bond of friendship or...
Or it's a predatory debt trap, something designed to steal a country's sovereignty.
Exactly.
And as we've seen in the research for this deep dive, the reality on the ground is so much messier, far more complex, and frankly, a lot more interesting than those sound bites. This isn't just about concrete. It's about energy security, geopolitics, and a really high-stakes gamble for two nuclear-armed nations.
So our mission today is to, look at the actual receipts, look at the maps, and figure out what has actually been built. We want to get past the rhetoric and see who's benefiting, who's paying, and why a highway in the Himalayas should matter to the rest of the world. Because to me, this feels like some kind of modern sci-fi version of the ancient Silk Road.
Yeah, only instead of camels carrying silk, we're talking about fiber optics, coal plants, and surveillance cameras.
Right. So where do we start? Let's start with the why. Why pour $62 billion into this specific patch of Earth?
To get the why, you really have to zoom out and look at the map from Beijing's perspective. You have to understand something called the Malacca Dilemma.
I've seen that term before. Sounds like the title of a spy movie.
It does, but it's a very real logistical nightmare for China. You see, right now, about 80% of China's oil imports have to pass through the Strait of Malacca. That's this incredibly narrow, very congested stretch of water between Malaysia and Indonesia.
It's a choke point.
It is the choke point. It's vulnerable to piracy, sure, but the bigger fear is a geopolitical conflict. Imagine a blockade by a rival navy. China's entire energy lifeline could be cut off. Just like that.
So if that strait closes, the lights could go out in Shanghai, the factories stop, the whole economy just grinds to a halt.
Precisely. That is the nightmare scenario they're trying to avoid.
Now look at CPEC on a map. It stretches about 3,000 kilometers from Kashgar, China's far west, all the way down through Pakistan to Gwadar port, right on the Arabian Sea.
So it's a shortcut, a massive backdoor.
It's a strategic escape hatch.
Okay.
It cuts the shipping distance for oil from the Middle East from about 12,000 kilometers down to just 3,000. You completely bypass the Strait of Malacca. The oil gets offloaded at Gwadar, and then it goes by pipeline or truck up through Pakistan and right into western China.
That is a huge strategic win. You're not just shaving off 9,000 kilometers of travel, you're eliminating a massive security risk. And for Pakistan, the idea was that they would become this zipper connecting China's economy to the sea. But before they could even think about becoming a transit hub, they had a much more immediate, almost visceral problem. They just had to keep the lights on.
Let's talk about that for a minute. If you rewind to, say, 2013, 2014, the situation in Pakistan was dire. We're not talking about the lights flickering. We're talking about load shedding, which is a very polite word for blackouts, that lasted 12, sometimes 16 hours a day.
Imagine that. Trying to run a factory when the power's off for most of the working day, you just can't. The economy was paralyzed. They had a shortfall of somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 megawatts.
So when CPEC started, energy was the early harvest. That was the first priority. Get the power on no matter what it takes.
And to be fair, looking at the data, they really delivered on that. It's important to give credit where it's due. By 2024, CPEC projects had added over 8,000 megawatts to Pakistan's national grid. We're talking about huge coal-fired power plants like Sahiwal and Hubco.
And those weren't the only ones, right? I saw notes about hydro and solar, too.
That's right. There's the Karut hydropower project, the Quaiti Azam solar park. The list goes on. And the result was tangible. You could feel it. Per capita electricity consumption jumped from 431 kilowatt hours in 2014 to 644 by 2022.
So it sounds like a massive success story then. The blackout stopped, the economy could start moving again, problem solved.
Well, this is the twist. The lights are on, yes, but now the bill has come due. And it's a staggering bill. And this brings us to probably the single most critical concept in this whole deep dive: circular debt.
Okay, let's unpack that. I see that term all the time in reports about the region's economies. It sounds like some kind of a Ponzi scheme, but it's more technical, right?
It is. Think of it like a chain reaction of non-payment. The government sets the price of electricity for you, the consumer. But for political reasons, that price is often subsidized. It's lower than what it actually costs to generate the power. On top of that, they're not great at collecting all the bills.
So they're selling the product for less than it costs to make from the start.
Exactly. But the power producers, in this case, the Chinese companies that built these huge plants, they still have to get paid. And their contracts guarantee them a certain return on their investment.
And here's the really tricky part. Those contracts are pegged to the US dollar, aren't they?
That is the killer. Pakistan collects its electricity bills in Pakistani rupees, but it has to pay the Chinese investors in US dollars. So when the rupee loses value against the dollar, which it has, the cost of that electricity just skyrockets for the government.
So they're collecting these depreciating rupees, but they owe a fixed amount of very strong dollars. And that gap just gets wider and wider.
That's the circular death spiral. As of mid-2025, the total power sector debt was sitting at roughly 2.38 trillion Pakistani rupees.
2.38 trillion. That's an astronomical number.
It's choking the entire economy. And specifically for CPEC, as of mid-2025, Pakistan owed about 423 billion rupees just in unpaid bills to the Chinese power plants.
Wait, hold on. So the plants are running, but Pakistan can't actually afford to pay the electric bill.
In essence, yes. It's a solvency crisis. They solved the supply problem. They have the megawatts now, but they walked right into a financial trap of their own making. A lot of these new plants rely on imported coal, which also means they're vulnerable to global price spikes. So yes, they fixed the energy crisis in terms of physics, but they created a whole new one in terms of finance.
It's the classic buy now, pay later problem on a national scale. You get the shiny new infrastructure, but you mortgage the future to pay for it.
And nowhere is that trade-off more visible and more controversial than at the very southern tip of this corridor, in Gwadar.
Gwadar, the jewel of CPEC. The vision for this place was incredible. It was supposed to be transformed from this tiny fishing village into the Singapore of the West.
And the location is, it's perfect. It's a natural deep water port right next to the Strait of Hormuz. For China, strategically, it's gold. It's the anchor for that whole Malacca escape route we talked about.
And they've built a lot there, haven't they? New deep water berths, a huge new international airport, this thing called the East Bay Expressway.
The hardware is there. You can see the cranes. But if you look at the actual usage numbers from the sources, well, the picture is sobering, to put it mildly.
Okay, so give us the numbers.
Well, let's compare. Karachi, which is Pakistan's main port, handles tens of millions of tons of cargo a year. In 2024, Gwadar handled about 0.034 million tons.
0.034. That's a rounding error. It's basically an empty port.
It operates in what the sources call fits and starts. It'll handle some specific project cargo, maybe some equipment for another CPEC project, or the odd shipment of fertilizer for Afghanistan. But it has not become that bustling 247 commercial hub with ships from all over the world lining up to dock.
But why? If the port is built and the location is so good, why is it a ghost town?
It's a combination of things. The overland connections to the rest of the country are still a work in progress, but there's also a huge amount of local friction. You're building this high-tech, futuristic port in Balochistan, which is one of Pakistan's poorest and most volatile provinces.
And the local people feel like they're being left out of the deal.
They feel squeezed out. To protect the port and the Chinese workers, the area is covered in checkpoints, fences, security cordons. Local fishing communities say they're losing access to the sea, losing the very livelihood this project was supposed to improve.
So instead of a vibrant economic zone, it's become more like a fortified compound.
In many ways, yes. And that creates tension. There have been protests, long-running sit-ins, and investors, they hate instability. You can't build the next Singapore if you need a paramilitary escort just to get to your office. So for now, Gwadar is a key strategic asset for China, but it's a commercial failure for Pakistan.
That's a really harsh reality check.
Yeah.
But CPEC isn't just about roads and ports. There's this sort of invisible layer of infrastructure we should talk about, the digital side of it.
Yes, the digital arteries. This is fascinating. While everyone was focused on the asphalt, they also laid an 820-kilometer optical fiber cable from the Khunjerab Path at the Chinese border down to Rawalpindi.
And that cost something like $44 million, right? Which, in a $62 billion project, is basically peanuts.
It is, but the strategic impact is huge. For one, it brought 3G and 4G internet to these really remote northern areas that barely had a phone line before. But more importantly, it creates a direct, secure data link between China and Pakistan that completely bypasses the international undersea cables.
Which brings us back to that whole security theme again.
Yeah.
If those undersea cables are ever cut or, tapped by intelligence agencies, China and Pakistan have their own private hardline through the mountains.
Precisely. And this digital layer goes even further, right into the cities. We're seeing the rollout of these safe city projects in places like Lahore and Islamabad.
Yeah, reading about this, it sounded a little dystopian.
It depends on your viewpoint. They've installed thousands of high-definition cameras, facial recognition systems, all supplied by Chinese tech firms like Huawei. The official goal is to fight crime and terrorism, which are very real threats in Pakistan.
But it also means a massive state surveillance apparatus is now baked into the urban infrastructure. You're not just importing technology, you're importing a model of governance.
You are. It's the export of the security state model, in a sense. And alongside the digital push, there's the industrial ambition. This is what's called Phase 2. Phase I was about building roads and power plants. Phase 2 is supposed to be about building factories in special economic zones, or SEZs.
Right. The idea being that Chinese companies, where labor is getting more expensive, will move their manufacturing to places like Rashikai or Dabeji in Pakistan.
That is the theory, yes. To turn Pakistan from an import-based economy into a manufacturing and export hub. But the sources are clear that this is still in the very, very early stages. It hasn't really taken off yet.
Why not? The roads are there now, the lights are on. What's the holdup?
It's because of all the other things we just talked about. A factory owner in China looks at the balance sheet. They see high electricity costs. Ironically, because of that circular debt problem, they see political instability, currency fluctuations, and suddenly, setting up shop in Vietnam or Bangladesh starts to look like a much safer bet.
So Pakistan built the house, but the tenants aren't really moving in yet.
That's a good way to put it. And, you can't talk about a project of this scale without talking at the neighbors, especially the elephant in the room.
India.
India. They have objected to CPEC from day one. And their objection isn't just about politics, it's rooted in geography.
Right, because the corridor physically enters Pakistan through Gilgit-Baltistan,
Which is part of the disputed territory of Kashmir.
a region that India also claims in its entirety.
Exactly. So from New Delhi's perspective, this is a violation of their sovereignty. But more than that, they see it as part of a grander strategy of encirclement. They have this term for it, the string of pearls, the idea that China is building a ring of ports and strategic alliances all around India. And Gwadar is a very big, very shiny pearl in that string.
It definitely raises the geopolitical temperature. But what about the actual temperature? We talked about all those new coal plants. What's the environmental cost of all this development?
It's significant. The sources are pretty clear on this. Beyond the CO2 emissions from the coal plants, the construction itself took a heavy toll. Just for the road network, over 54,000 trees were cut down. In one forest division alone, the Saran division, more than 10,000 trees were lost.
And then you add the traffic. I saw an estimate of 7,000 trucks a day eventually using the Karakoram Highway.
Yeah.
That's a lot of diesel fumes in a very fragile mountain ecosystem.
It is, but maybe the most direct human cost comes from the huge hydro projects. Look at the Dimer-Basha Dam. It's a massive feat of engineering, but it's going to submerge about 31 villages.
And displace something like 35,000 people.
35,000 people who have to move. And as we know, resettlement is never a clean process. Compensation is often seen as inadequate. People are losing ancestral lands. Their entire social fabric is torn apart. It's that classic conflict between national development and local displacement.
Okay, so we've got the strategic wins, the energy fix, the ghost port, the crushing debt, the environmental cost, the geopolitical tension. If we zoom all the way out, what is the final financial verdict? Is this the debt trap we always hear about?
That really is the trillion rupee question, isn't it? The term debt trap diplomacy implies a deliberate plan, that China lends money knowing the country can't pay it back, so it can then seize the assets, like a repo man for ports.
Right, take control of the port if you default on the loan.
But the reality, according to the sources, seems to be a bit more nuanced. Yes, Pakistan owes billions. The energy payments alone are crippling. And China has had to repeatedly roll over loans, more than $5 billion worth since 2022, just to keep Pakistan's economy from collapsing.
And rolling over loans is just lending new money so they can pay the interest on the old money. That's a really desperate cycle to be in.
It is. But this looks less like a predatory master plan from China and more like a a complex mix of Pakistan's own structural economic problems, like circular debt, combined with the very high guaranteed rates of return they promised to the Chinese investors in the first place.
It sounds like maybe both sides miscalculated. Pakistan overestimated how quickly its economy would grow, and China underestimated just how deep Pakistan's economic problems were.
I think that's a very fair assessment. It's a bad feedback loop. The ultimate risk is that if those special economic zones don't start generating real export income soon, Pakistan simply won't earn the foreign currency, the dollars, that it needs to pay back the loans for all this infrastructure. Mathematically, it becomes almost impossible.
So where does that leave us? We've gone through the map, the money, the politics. What's the big picture takeaway from all this?
I think the takeaway is that CPEC is a classic high-risk, high-reward gamble. On one hand, it genuinely did fix a crippling energy crisis. You can't overstate the importance of that. You simply cannot modernize a country in the dark.
That's true. But the cost of that solution was enormous debt and a lot of social and environmental strain.
Exactly. And the future now depends entirely on phase two. Can Pakistan make the leap from building infrastructure to actually using it effectively? Can they get those factories up and running in the SEZs? Can they become a real trade conduit for Afghanistan and Central Asia?
If they can pull that off, they could become a major global trade hub.
They could. If CPEC succeeds, it really does redraw the trade map of Asia. It creates a new economic center of gravity that bypasses traditional Western-controlled sea lanes. But if it fails, it leaves behind a legacy of underused concrete and a mountain of debt that will burden generations of Pakistanis for decades to come.
It really is a fork in the road. Is this new Silk Road a pathway to genuine prosperity, or is it just a very, very expensive driveway to nowhere? That's a question that only time and probably the export numbers from those economic zones will be able to answer.
And it's something the rest of the world will be watching very, very closely. Because if this model works in Pakistan, it validates China's entire Belt and Road Initiative. If it fails here, the whole grand project takes a massive hit.
Absolutely. Well, that's where we'll wrap up this deep dive into the $62 billion gamble. We hope you have a clearer picture now of what's actually happening on the ground beyond the simple headlines.
It is a fascinating ongoing story of ambition and consequence.
Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next deep dive.